Hello there. So a few years ago I made a video about vegetarianism in Latin targeted primarily at the pseudo-intellectuals who refuse to listen to you unless you present your arguments in some classical language. And there are quite a few such pseudo-intellectuals. That was my first video in Latin. After that I have made a few more, and for each of my videos in Latin I've made a video with English comments about it, except for my first one. So I have decided I will make a video with English comments to it as well.
Salvete, ego sunt teos amargia ex Croatia, et ego faciam electronicum visum de vegetarianismo. In hoc electronico visu loquar lingua latina. Ergo ego vegetarianista sum, ego credo carnem edere non licitum esse. Quomodo id licitum esse possit? Si carnem edimus aliquis occidi debet. Id saepe non videmus, sed non licet nobis id ignorare. Et in sina multi homines canes sedunt, eas dem canes quas nos amamus. In Helvetia etiam multi homines feles sedunt. An canes et feles, quodam modo differentes sunt abubus et suibus, quas nos occidimus, ut carnem possimus edere. Forsan feles et canes sapientiores bubus et suibus sunt, sed boves et sues certe sapientiores liberis infantibus sunt, et quis neget infantes occidere non licitum esse. Sane, aliquae animalia non possunt vivere si ea animalia carnem non edant. Ergo quid? Mantides religiosae, magna insecta, etiam non possunt subolem habere si eae non occidant et edant mares suos. An eius causa, quodam modo, licitum est mulieribus, quae homines sunt, suos maritos occidere.
So I think by far the strongest argument for vegetarianism is the ethical one. Try to explain why murder is wrong without implying that meat is wrong as well. It's hard, isn't it? By far the most common response is that meat is supposedly natural, which is also quite a ridiculous response, as it should be obvious that what is natural has nothing to do with what is moral. There are, I think, three somewhat serious responses to the ethical argument for vegetarianism. The first one is that animals we eat are, unlike humans, not capable of suffering. Well, the scientific consensus seems to be that all the birds and all the mammals and perhaps even octopuses, with the possible exception of a mammal called the naked mole rats, are capable of feeling at least some suffering, be it only physical pain. And I see no reason to doubt that, other than a cognitive dissonance from eating meat. The second one is that a vegetarian diet actually kills more sentient animals than a meat-based diet, which is today empirically false. Animals we eat today are mostly grain-fed, and the production of grains they eat kills quite a lot of rodents. And even if that were true, I don't think that would be a valid argument, as I think there is a huge difference between intentional killing and unintentional killing. The third argument is the appeal to consequences, the claim that a vegetarian diet would lead to widespread nutritional deficiencies. I think one of the best responses to that is discussing who really has the burden of proof here. Think of all of those horrific scenes from factory farming and slaughterhouses that you can see in Earthlings and similar documentaries. You are one claiming that all of that is somehow necessary. Don't you think you are setting yourself an impossibly high burden of proof here? Nevertheless, there are people who think we have the burden of proof here, or that the burden of proof that meat is necessary to avoid the widespread nutritional deficiencies has indeed been met. I will try to refute the most mainstream such arguments in this video. There are of course some other arguments for vegetarianism, but I think they are significantly weaker than the ethical one. There is the health argument for vegetarianism, and sure, you can argue that way. A vegetarian diet almost by definition contains no heme iron, the substance found basically only in red meat, and it is thought to cause colon cancer and appears to somehow also be causing breast cancer. Many vegetarians will bring up heart health, but hey, listen, it goes without saying that vegetarian diet does not really have to be healthier when it comes to that. If you go vegetarian but you start drinking coconut milk or eat those fake cheeses based on coconuts, you have probably done a bad thing when it comes to heart health. Coconut milk contains way more saturated fat than cow's milk does. Some vegetarians will also use the argument that a vegetarian diet is less likely to lead to vitamin K deficiency, and hey, listen, it goes without saying that it doesn't have to be that way. There's also the environmental argument for vegetarianism, actually two significantly different ones. The first one is that vegetarian diet results in significantly less greenhouse gas emissions and is thus better for the climate. Now, whether my diet is actually better for the climate than a normal Croatian diet is, I honestly don't know. I drink a lot of rice milk, which is the cheapest and, in my opinion, the tastiest of alternative milks. But rice milk, like cow's milk, has an externality of emitting a lot of methane in its production. I'm not aware of any actual studies comparing the environmental impact of rice milk and cow's milk. So as far as I can tell, vegetarian diet doesn't have to be more acceptable when it comes to climate. The other environmental argument for vegetarianism is the antibiotic resistance. And sure, you can argue that way, as I did in my video in Latin, although it is much more of an argument against eating eggs from factory farms than against eating meat. Anyway, let's continue with the video in Latin.
Argumenta pro carne edenda, quae sae pedantur, sunt. Argumentum primum. Carnis minime carus modus vitamini B12 acquirendi est. Ita multa animalia, boves inter alia, habent in suis lactibus intestinis bacteria quae vitaminum B12 faciunt. Sed in carne quae non cara est vitaminum B12 paene non datur. Bubus et alis animalibus quae edimus hodie semper antibiotica dantur. Ea antibiotica protegunt ea animalia a morbis, quos bacteria faciunt, quia ea animalia paene semper in parvis et sordidis spatiis sita sunt. Sed antibiotica etiam ea bacteria quae vitaminum B12 faciunt occidunt. Antibiotica enim et bona et mala bacteria occidunt. Carnis piscium vitaminum B12 continet. Sed caro piscium multo carior plures pecunias debes dare, ut carnem piscium possis emere, piolis quae vitaminum B12 continent est.
So yeah, before the COVID-19 pandemic, there was this idea that supplements are somehow bad. After we have seen how the widespread vitamin D deficiency made the COVID-19 pandemic significantly more deadly, I guess that nobody thinks like that today. And vitamin B supplements are, by the way, way safer than vitamin D supplements.
Dare magnam summam antibioticorum animalibus etiam possibile facit, ut aliquae bacteria quae et animalia et homines morbidos faciunt ab antibioticis invulnerabilia fiant. Materia genetica de invulnerabilitate ab antibioticis in paene omnibus bacteriis data est, et ea potest activa fieri. Probabiliter id fit iam hodie. Forsan multos morbos, quae hodie possumus curare antibioticis in futura, non poterimus curare, carnem edendi causa.
So, if you want to do the number one thing to reduce the chance of a pandemic of superbacteria occurring, here is what you do. Either stop eating eggs, or find some small farmer for whom you are sure they don't pump their chickens with antibiotics, and buy eggs from them. Here in the small town of Donji Miholjac, that's not hard to do. It's hard to give the exact numbers, as the estimates vary widely, but I think we can safely say that most antibiotics these days are used in the egg industry. I have heard all sorts of arguments against that. The only one that is not ridiculous on the face of it goes like this. Supposedly, the biggest danger is not massive use of antibiotics in animals, but trace amounts of antibiotics found in food. Now, how exactly do trace amounts of antibiotics lead to antibiotic resistance? I don't know, but that's how the argument goes. So supposedly, since trace amounts of antibiotics are very rarely found in meat, dairy, and eggs, but are often found in wine and grapes, the biggest contributor to antibiotic resistance are actually modern vineyards. I think the best response to such an argument is citation needed. Find me any serious biologist who is claiming that. The fact that only 0.5% of antibiotics go to plants, so even less than that is used in vineyards. It's quite an extraordinary claim that less than 0.5% of antibiotics that are used in vineyards would have more of an effect than more than 50% of antibiotics that are used in the egg industry. And this issue of superbacteria really shakes me out of my anarchism. Is there really a free market solution to that? The fact is that most people are completely unaware of the problem, so they cannot choose what they buy wisely. People who are vaguely aware of the problem, like I was a few years ago, tend to respond incorrectly. Many people stop eating meat because of that, but they continued buying eggs from factory farms and still think they are helping. Perhaps the government really should do something here.
Argumentum secundum. Edere magnam summam omega 3 acidi protegit a morbis cordis. Simpliciter hoc non est veritas. Evidentia huius non datur. Et si hoc veritas esset, non debeamus magnam summam carnis edere, debeamus magnam summam lini edere. Linum enim plenius omega 3 acidis quam caro est.
So yeah, omega-3 acids are supposed to increase your risk of getting a heart attack by increasing your so-called good cholesterol, your HDL. But I think everybody who has studied the topic a bit would agree that there is a huge incentive to make people believe that HDL protects against heart attacks, but that the evidence for that is well seen at best. The evidence that LDL causes heart attacks is truly overwhelming. If that weren't true, the statins would not work to treat heart disease. The evidence that HDL protects against heart disease is a very different story.
Argumentum tertium. In optima diaeta triens energiae ex proteinis acquisita est. De veritate huius informationis loquiturid quod lac hominum continet paene nulla proteina.
So yeah, the fact is that human beings need surprisingly little protein to be healthy. However, there's a catch. You actually need to get all the essential amino acids. For many people around the world, the main source of protein in their diet is wheat, bread. And since wheat contains no lysine, they suffer from lysine deficiency, which weakens the immune system. Now, I don't think that's likely to happen if somebody in the developed world switches to a vegetarian diet, but I can see that happening if somebody has fallen for pseudoscience and cuts their protein intake as much as possible. And yes, I think the advocates of low protein diets are dangerous pseudoscientists. The most common argument for low protein diets is that protein we eat makes our blood more acidic and thus dissolves the calcium in our bones, causing osteoporosis and kidney stones. Now, whether there is some truth to that, hey, listen, the evidence seems quite clear that the biggest cause of osteoporosis today is vitamin K deficiency. So cutting on protein obviously doesn't help with it, and may not even be safe, as bones are made partly from the protein called the As for kidney stones, hey, listen, people put on low protein diets, for example, the ketogenic diet, do not have a lower risk of kidney stones. In fact, the evidence is rather clear that the opposite is true. The other arguments advocates of low protein diets make is that supposedly protein intake above a certain and relatively low threshold somehow causes our blood sugar levels to spike. I think the best response to such arguments is citation needed. The advocates of low protein diets, of course, can point to quite a few studies supposedly showing low protein diets help with all sorts of diseases, but somebody pointed me on an internet forum. There's a flaw in nearly all of them. How do you know the disease is made worse by the protein itself rather than by allergies? Milk and soy are the biggest sources of allergies, and low protein diet avoids those. This is very hard to control for, and puts a huge question mark on those studies that advocates of low protein diets point to. There is another argument advanced by PETA, PETA, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, that methionine you eat significantly increases your LDL cholesterol. Well, there is a grain of truth to that. There have been some studies in rats showing that methionine intake does indeed increase the LDL cholesterol. But how much methionine would you actually have to eat for that to happen? And I was claiming that on an internet forum. One person there has calculated that you would need to eat around 300 grams of sesame seeds per day to measurably increase your cholesterol levels. Sesame seeds being the food that's the richest in methionine. So yeah, if you are worried about your cholesterol, trans fat and saturated fats are the real enemies, not the animal protein. Of course, those three arguments are not the only ones that you get that try to prove that widespread vegetarianism will lead to widespread nutritional deficiencies, but they are the most common ones. Some of them are so detached from reality they don't even deserve a response.
spero ut vos de his rebus cogitare faciam. Quod nos sedimus, et quem aut quam nos sedimus, afficit homines et alia sentientia animalia circa nos. Cum carnem emimus, facimus plures carnes fieri. Id est, plura animalia ali et occidi. Leges de animalibus protegendis id non afficiunt. Gratias vobis ad spectandum.
So yeah, many people who are worried about animal abuse support animal rights instead of going vegetarian. I think it's very problematic. You realize how absurd it is to demand the arguments to do something while you continue doing harm. Also, what makes you think the policies advocated by the Humane Slaughter Association and similar groups are science-based? To think there is hard data conclusively showing that being poisoned by CO2 is less painful than traditional slaughter? I don't think so. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video.